It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our next speaker, the one and only Karen Worstell. You'll be hearing about her 25-year career in cybersecurity, allowed her to serve in research, engineering, consulting, and operational capacities for multiple iconic brands, including Boeing, SRI International, Bank of America, AT&T Wireless, Microsoft, and Russell Investments. Along the way, she discovered her passion for helping others exceed their own expectations and overcome any challenges. She earned a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry at the University of Washington, while participating in various symphonic and chapter music, I hope I said that right, music groups, and later received her MS in computer science and a master's in theology and Jewish studies. She is endorsed as a chaplain by the UMJC and is a certified master coach through RMT. Her company, W Risk Group, provides executive and leadership coaching and online programs. She hosts the Mojo Maker for Women X in Tech podcast, as well as weekly live broadcasts for WOC in STEM called All Steamed Up with Mocha and Foam. Karen's work has been featured in media from ZDNet to Forbes. Her book, Your Amazing Itty Bitty Guide to Personal Data Protection, is an Amazon bestseller, and she is a contributor for multiple professional publications in cybersecurity and journals on spiritual life. Karen lives in Denver with her husband, Craig, 2 cats, and her golden retriever, Cody. She enjoys hiking, skiing, cycling, and is a regular speaker to professional associations and corporations on burnout prevention and improving organizational leadership performance. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Karen.
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Okay, great. Wow, it is so wonderful. Everybody's been saying this morning, to be actually able to see faces and to interact. And I hope what we'll do today is have some interaction. I have no slides, and that's very intentional because the topic that I'm going to talk to you about is a heart-centered topic. And when we get all involved in reading things that are up on the screen, we go right up into our heads. So I really do want to make this conversation one that that you can absorb, and there's going to be pieces of it that you might feel like you want to remember, and it'd be great to have a slide. If there's anything in here that you want, to get more information on later, just connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay? So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story, because this is part of my burnout, my own personal burnout story. When I was a mom with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, I had $13 in my pocket to last me for 2 weeks. And as I stood in the section at the grocery store, in the produce section, looking at apples, all I could think was, where are the affordable apples? I mean, then they were 49 cents a pound. So I went back to the produce manager and I said, do you have some apples that you've pulled from the shelf that you're not going to sell at full price anymore? And can I buy those instead? And that moment in my life was such a riveting, like one of those moments where the lightning bolt hits you, because right here, I hear this voice that says, something has got to change. And you can do it. About that same time, I do have a hacker, older brother, and he brought over a TRS-80 Model 1 computer with a serial number of 6, with 64K of RAM, and he spread the whole thing. It took up almost the entire space of this table, spread it across the table, and he looked at me and he said, sister, you need to learn to code. Now, I'm a 98% left-brained. individual. Even though I did get degrees in science, that was because my father insisted that that's what I study, even though I was a musician. And I thought probably I would grow up to design dresses for Barbie dolls. I was not naturally inclined to do this. So when he puts this computer in front of me and he says, get busy, you need to start using this. And I'm looking at this blinking amber cursor on this tiny little monitor and all these ribbon cables. I was sure that if I typed in something wrong, it was going to go up in flames. So this is one of the things I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more today is about allyship. Because allyship for me in that moment was the person who was willing to step in front of this train and say, you need to make a change in direction, and I'm going to stick with you while you do that and make it work. So with Michael's help, I learned my first programming language, and after that, after I learned Visual Basic, I went on to teach myself another programming language called Forth, and I found out I was really good at it. That was when the local university opened up a graduate program in computer science, and I heard that. Oops, I'm hitting the mic. Sorry about that, everybody. I heard that voice again that said, this is it. You might be able to do that. Go ahead and apply. And this voice in here is so quiet sometimes, but the voice up here gets really loud. And what I heard up here was, wait a second, you have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. I thought you wanted to be a good mother. And let's not forget, you have no money, and you kind of suck at math. Well, I applied anyway. I loved programming. I didn't really know what I didn't know. And when I got accepted, I started my master's program in computer science at Pacific Lutheran University. And 2 years later, I graduated with my master's degree. 12 years after that, I was a CEO of a Silicon Valley startup. And a few years after that, I left my job as a Chief Information Security Officer at Microsoft in order to continue my own business and do what I'm doing today. The reason I tell that story, though, is the drive that it took for me to spend 2 years sleeping on the floor in my clothes every night, so that I would not get too tired or too sound asleep and miss my 8 o'clock class, because I had 2 small children to get ready for either kindergarten or to go to grandma's house in order to, make this work. I had a lot of people helping me, but my drive was, and I want you to hear this because you all have one, your why. Your drive, the thing that makes you want to get up and do something every day, is a really huge factor in burnout, in my opinion. For me, it was the fear of not being able to provide for my children. And my drive, my why, was making sure that I could launch these children responsibly and well when they were adults, right? It's a pretty compelling drive. And what that kind of translated into in my own story was, aside from sleeping on the floor every night for 2 years to make sure that I could get everything done that I needed to get done, it translated then in the next year as I was finishing my master's thesis on fast hardware encryption and working at the Boeing company in my very first job ever, and commuting an hour or so both ways, and finding myself so exhausted. And the first thing, as I'm just absolutely worn out, probably from the graduate school experience, but as I finished, or as I realized that I was this exhausted, what did I say to myself? What does everybody say to themselves when they're just so exhausted they can hardly stand up anymore? I could sleep standing up. They say, get up earlier. Clearly you're not doing enough. You need to go to the gym. I'm tired because I'm not working out. So 4 o'clock in the morning, I started my day at the gym. And I continued this until I got this massive headache, and I couldn't make it go away. And those days you could call the doctor and they would give you a prescription over the phone. So I called the doctor and I'm like, I have one of those sinus infections again. This one's really a doozy. I'm going to need some antibiotics. And she's like, no problem. And I went and picked up the prescription. 4 days later, I called her back. I said, I'm wearing sunglasses in the house. It's too painful to even see. I don't know what's the matter. And she says, well, I'm not giving you anything else over the phone. I want to see you in my office. And when I showed up and had the test, I found out I had mono, meningitis, and a strep infection in my bloodstream. The net result of that was I was completely unable to get out of a chair for the next 8 weeks. I couldn't work. I couldn't even pick up a paperback. I was too weak to pick up a paperback book to even distract myself. I had a whole lot of time to sit in that chair and think about what I was going to do next and how did I get to this place. That, my friend, was my burnout experience. Burnout, we use the term burnout a lot. In fact, 65% of our workforce in the US right now self-identifies as burned out. Before the pandemic, in the tech industry, that number was about 57%. It's really high. What is it that contributes to us working at the way that we do that allows us to say, I'm burned out and I keep going, right? How do we ignore all of those boundaries and we just keep moving along? So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what burnout is and the strategies that I've come to understand as wear your bra, which BRA are my 3 pillars for dealing with burnout. So we'll get to that in a little bit, okay? But according to the World Health Organization, burnout is now an official syndrome, and it is the result of unrelenting workplace stress, unmanaged workplace stress. It has kind of 4 components, and the keys to actually learning how to recognize burnout for what it really is before it gets to the point that I and so many others have experienced is to say it is physical exhaustion, right? That's pretty easy. How many of us, when we are tired, do something to remedy being tired, besides drinking more coffee? Does anybody take a nap, rest more, take a break? Good, okay. The rest of you, that's something to think about. The other one that is a lot harder to recognize is emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion can affect us from a whole lot of directions. Last year was a major case of emotional exhaustion for everybody, practically everybody in the world, right? Dealing with the unknown, dealing with the unexpected, dealing with tragedy, dealing with a news cycle that is unrelenting about all of the things that are outside of our control that we should care about. Emotional exhaustion happens in our current world, in our social media cycle, and in everything else that we do, because the world wants you to care about every single thing that's going on to the max. Look at this, look at that, look at this. I want you to care about this. You should care about that. What kind of a person are you if you don't care about this? And what every single one of us needs to learn to do is to pull our hand back from that force that's dragging us along and put it right here and say, I care about this. And that's not a selfish, and recognize that's not a selfish thing to do. So emotional exhaustion is another piece of it. The third thing that contributes, does anybody, I work in the cybersecurity industry. We have a type of humor that is like this black humor. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. Okay. cynical humor, and it's actually pretty funny. But the number one indicator of burnout in an organization is cynicism. It's like the biggest red flag ever. You know that burnout is a problem in the organization that you're a part of when what you hear is a type of language that says, I don't know what management is thinking. This is the most idiotic decision I've ever seen. Clearly, these people don't care about their employees. They are only in this to walk across somebody's back to get to the top. Has anybody ever heard anything like that? That's irrational belief and irrational behavior that actually takes us to a place where we're starting to believe that there's nobody who has anybody else's best interests at heart, and that we are a victim of their actions. When we start moving into that is this place where the workforce detaches. And as project managers, one of the things I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience with is how do you mobilize a team that is detached at work, right? Excuse me, I'm gonna get a sip of water. When you have detachment at work and cynicism going on at work, burnout is definitely right there. So that's the third thing to look for. The last thing is where you really make a difference. I've had so many project managers who, pulled a rabbit out of a hat, made things work, pulled the teams together, got things working. And my quick answer, can project managers make a big difference for burnout in an organization, is yes. And it's because the number one or the number 4 thing on the list is a lack of effectiveness or a sense of a lack of effectiveness. The throwing the work over the wall syndrome, right? There's no clear handoff, there's no clean transition, there's no process. And so all of the things that contribute to a feeling of a lack of effectiveness at work is a major contributor to burnout. All of those things combined together is what people are dealing with all over the world right now. And our workforce is really feeling the impact. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact of women in the industry. Burnout, or the impact on women in the industry by all this burnout, because women took the brunt of it in 2020. We lost millions of women from the workforce. The progress that has been made in women's advancement in roles in the technology sector has been set back 10 years by the women who had to leave the workforce, making a choice, a healthy choice probably for themselves. But when you have the collision of everything with work and everything with, with everything with family, and you have an unworkable situation, you have people who are just basically calling it quits. So we already have a challenging situation because, especially in tech, we have statistics like when I got my master's degree in technology, 34% of the computing workforce was made up by women. Today, that number, the technical computing workforce, is closer to about 16%. In every area of STEM, we've made gains. In computing professions, we're falling off a cliff. A lot of it is cultural. I'm about to go back. I just accepted a new position with another tech company. I'm going to go back to work with VMware in about 2 weeks. And I'm really excited about it. And one of the things, so everybody can keep me honest, because I'm going to be looking at whether or not I actually practice what I preach when I step right back into the tech sector again. But, one of the things that I've noticed is we have a very male kind of language at work, Anybody else see that? Well, the whole world, but I mean, there are organizations and people that I interview on the podcast who work in organizations that don't have that. So when I step back into tech, especially into cyber, where the language has become particularly weaponized and militarized, right? As we talk about threat data and intel and cyber warfare and everything, it's like, wow, this is jarring to me. I'm not a former Navy SEAL. I'm not going to talk like this. So there's challenge. This is part of what causes us to feel not part of the group and unconnected. And I think when we have that sense, it just adds to the barrier that we already feel that is contributing to the burnout. It's another factor. Okay, so for the rest of the time that we have together, I really want to just talk about these three pillars. And I came up with these 3 pillars apart from the 4 areas that we just talked about that the World Health Organization describes for burnout, because I wrote an article on LinkedIn, and it's out on my profile if you want to read it. And after I wrote this article about how we can do one thing, like put our cell phones away for one day to try to do one small step to reducing our stress and our burnout, I invited people who were within my network to reach out to me, and if they wanted to schedule 30 minutes so we could talk on the phone about the article. I wanted to get their feedback. A lot of people, I was really surprised by the number that took me up on that. And I listened to their stories, and what I want to share with you is the one that just broke my heart, because it's another thing that can help us understand our own boundaries. I got a phone call from a guy who worked for me many years ago, and he said, "Karen, I killed my heart at work." And I thought, well, what does that mean exactly? And the next thing he said is, I am 7 months out from a heart transplant. I'm only 56. And he said, I killed it by assuming that every single thing at work was my responsibility. That there wasn't any way else, if I couldn't get something done or if I couldn't get help from somebody else, it was going to be up to me to pull it over the line. That if there was a problem that was developing in the organization, I had to fix it. That I couldn't let anything go. Does that sound familiar to anybody? He says, I kept that up to the point where one day I couldn't get out of bed. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing my own story played back to me. This is happening in a lot of places. And the next thing he said was this, and this is another thing, another kind of a warning sign. He said, I'd like you to talk to my wife, because now that I can't work, and he says, and I'm just fixing to go back to work, and I don't feel ready. I don't feel physically ready, but I feel like I have to, because my wife is driving herself now the same way I did, and I can see the same pattern setting in place. He goes, what should I say to her? And I thought, oh my gosh, because here's the trick. When women in particular in the workplace, whether it's tech, whether it's project management, whether it's advertising, whether it's finances, financial management, we feel like we have to work twice as hard, maybe 3 times as hard, just to be seen with our male peers, right? That we cannot afford to make a mistake. We cannot afford to be the one in the room who's wrong. That we have to be, my boss used to call it, be obscenely prepared. Never go into a meeting unless you are obscenely prepared. There was never a question that I couldn't answer if I went into a meeting. That's how prepared I would be, right? When someone comes to a person who's driven like that, possibly driven by a fear of failure like mine, and they say, you need to take a break. What we hear is, Oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. Oh my gosh, I need to work harder. I need to go to the gym at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm exhausted. So these are the things I want you to kind of think about it from the standpoint of your own self. Everybody is different. But if the thing that you're saying is, in order for me to prove myself, I have to be 3 times as good, I have to take on extra work, I have to show this, you're setting yourself up for that pattern that kind of puts you in a position of emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion, and everything else. And when somebody says, I want you to take a break, it's not an indictment of your capability, right? So that's I really want to leave you with that. Okay, let's move on to the 3 pillars. So BRA. I picked it intentionally because it's easy to remember. BRA, belief. The B is belief. You need to believe with all your heart and know yourself, what your own capabilities are. And that they usually will far exceed what you believe them to be. So I want you to believe in yourself. And this really was driven home to me when Megan came through one of our workshops that we did before COVID. And I want to read to you what Megan said. She said, before the workshop, I believe it is better for me as a senior software engineer to fly under the radar. If I just keep my head down, if I do work better than anybody else, if I take on the projects better than anybody else, I will be noticed, I will get rewarded, and that's the best place for me to be. But she was really frustrated because she wasn't getting any promotions and she wasn't getting the recognition. After we went through a very simple set of exercises about knowing yourself and your self-worth, this is what she said. I have a renewed sense of self-awareness and confidence, and I've learned that my professional self-worth is in no way dependent on what I am able to accomplish, how productive I am, or how others perceive me. It's really, it's like the frog in the pot of cold water when you turn on the heat, right? That we can start to equate our worth to what we produce. And that's not you. So I want you to know that, but to believe in yourself and to believe in the difference that you can make by working within the parameters of what you need to do in order to have a quality life of your own that matters. Okay? And let me mention, there's a whole bunch of pieces that we put together for you. It's been out there for some time. There's 2 things. One of them is a free download, bless you, a free download on, we call the Flame Proof Guide, and it's your guide to not burning out. It's on the web at www.beanally.today, so you can download that for free. The other thing that's out there, which has a fee attached to it, but that is a course. It's a self-guided mini course, and it's the same material, but it's with exercises and video, so it teaches you a lot of the material about how to deal with burnout and how to prevent it. So I would invite you, if any of that sounds like it resonates with you and you'd like to know more, there's not enough time to cover it all here, but I want you to make sure that you have access to that. And the people who are attending our clubhouse rooms on burnout prevention are telling me that the free download has been really helpful with working not just with themselves, but with their team. So that's out there for you. Okay, the next. Back to the power of belief. The power of belief to make a difference, it comes from this place, one of the reasons I didn't do the slides, because I want us to listen to this. I want us to be in this space where we hear this heart, hear this message, call it your still small voice, call it your inner wisdom, call it intuition. You have that. It is one of your strongest characteristics as a human being. And when you can learn, what I call learn to listen to that download and bring that information into you, just like mine, it's like, this can be different and you can do it. That is the voice I want you to listen to. This voice up here in the head is your inner judge, and you've heard a lot about that with imposter syndrome and other things. But when that is going to try to negate almost everything you hear from here. If you have a gut instinct about this is what you can do, this is what's possible, this is where we should go, and you override it with all of the logic in your head about all the reasons why that won't work, you're in that same battle, right, that I talked about for myself. Like, you don't go to grad school. How could you possibly make that work? So that's a lesson learned, and I really encourage you. And just like Megan found out, when she got confident in listening to her own instinct and listening to what her value was and what her worth was, she was able to advocate for herself. She ended up getting, within a month of that workshop, she ended up getting the biggest promotion of her life to senior software engineer, and ended up giving the presentation to the entire company leadership team. So it was really great for her visibility. Okay, the R in BRA is for resilience. Okay, resilience is basically the ability to get up one more time than you've been knocked down. It's easy to say, but it takes being really brave. It takes knowing yourself well enough that you don't believe that fake news in your head. That's what I would call it, our own internally generated fake news. It means not succumbing to imposter syndrome. I see this on LinkedIn all the time. Everybody, or on Twitter, I guess it's on Twitter more. It's like, imposter syndrome. Does anybody ever beat imposter syndrome? And the jury seems to say it's about 80% of the people think imposter syndrome is here to stay and there's nothing you can do about it. I disagree with that. Imposter syndrome is simply believing this instead of this, right? And it takes some practice. There's an author, Shirzad Kameen. I use his work a lot on what he calls positivity quotient. And he talks about how we have our inner sage and our inner judge. This is the inner sage, this is the inner judge. It actually is a switch in your brain that you can switch from sage or from judge mode back into sage mode, and this is how simple it is. There's something in our brain that actually makes that trigger happen to help us bring us back into our, our centered selves. And it's something as simple as picking up, I'm going to say, what are those great peaches we get in August? Palisade peaches. Okay, think of a Palisade peach right now. Nice, really red, fuzzy peach. Smell it, like the fragrance. Take a bite of it. Let the juice run down your chin. That switches your brain. Thinking about it might help. Really doing it is super effective. But that is enough to switch our brain out of judge mode and get back into sage mode. Bring us back into reality. So those are some practices that we can do for resilience. Resilience takes knowing those warning signs of burnout, the physical, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and the sense of ineffectiveness, and asking yourself, how am I doing with that? Like, what is getting to me? And what can I do about it? And believe in your ability to make a difference and do something to change it. Resilience is often just that courage, to say at the end of the day, I'm going to try again tomorrow. But don't do it in a way that is driving you, that's self-condemning, that is saying, if you don't do this, you're a slacker. If you don't do this, Am I the only one who does that? Okay, good. Sometimes I'm being very self-disclosing, and then I'm like, oh man, maybe nobody is. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about cynicism, because I mentioned it as the #1 sign of burnout in an organization. Cynicism comes from a really wounded place. Cynicism, I had a zero tolerance policy in all of my organizations. I never ran mega organizations, but organizations, cybersecurity organizations of 350 people. If cynicism took off there, it would be like gasoline on a brush fire in Colorado in August. You can't let it get hold. And so whenever I saw that, it was like immediately, what is going on here? Why is this happening? What do we need to do about it? So it sounds like I'm kind of hardcore about it, but the truth of it is cynicism, as it comes from this wounded place. And this wounded place is one of a person who has had the life experience, traumatic or chronic life experience, that there's no help coming. It's just up to them. They're all alone in this. There's not a way out of this box, right? And they develop this sense that there really isn't anybody out there. So we can practice compassion when it comes to cynicism, when we're dealing with that in our organization. At the same time, we're saying that we're not going to allow it to continue. Does that make sense? Okay. Another thing that's really helpful when it's very frequent in the cybersecurity world that we get a decision that comes passed down to us from above in the organization, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's very frustrating. Another example of this that everybody's dealing with is doing more with less. You got to get this project done. By the way, there's some extra stuff we need to add to the project. By the way, we're cutting your team, right? So it's real easy to look at that and just go, what are these people thinking? My invitation to you is to do something I call turn it and turn it. And it comes from a very old sage that his name was Ben Bagbag, of all things. But in the 1st century, he said, turn it and turn it, for the wisdom is in it. And so when you get something that comes down that looks like it doesn't make a lot of sense, and you have a certain perspective of it, there could very easily be another perspective that's hard for us to see right away because we're kind of locked into our own belief of what that thing might be. Turn it a little bit and say, what does it look like from over here? It's an exercise and a practice that I've had people come back to me later and say, oh my gosh, that saved my marriage. So it's trying to get the perspective that says, okay, I see it like this. This person might see it this way. I used to call it like in big organizations, like major banks, when we would get these kinds of decisions that would come down, I'd say, really what this is like poking the amoeba. Upper management doesn't really know. It's too complex of an organization to really know what the outcome is of their decision. So they're poking the amoeba to see what happens, right? If you're from a biology standpoint, if you have an amoeba, it's a single cell organism and you're looking at it under a microscope and you come at it with a pipette and you poke it, it will just sort of like this blob, just kind of like decides to move away from the source of pain, and it'll take on a different shape and it'll show up somewhere else on the slide and you'll be chasing it across the screen. But that's what poking the amoeba does. In a large organization, sometimes that's all management is doing, is trying. It's not like they know what the outcome is, and it's up to us to come back and tell them. So that's another thing we can do for perspective and to help with the resilience. Okay. The last thing in BRA A is allyship. And then we've already heard it said a couple of times today that when we lift one up, all rise. I believe that with all my heart. We had a funny experience at the RSA conference. RSA is a cybersecurity conference in San Francisco. It's the largest cybersecurity conference in the world. And we were able to run a 4-day workshop there, or 4-hour workshop there in Moscone Center that was focused on our talent in cybersecurity and how are we going to retain talent. And burnout was a part of that conversation. As a part of promoting it, we made these badge ribbons and everything with our hashtag, which was Be an Ally. And be an ally, it was everywhere, all over the RSA conference. These little purple badge ribbons were there. We had them on cards. We had them on our slides. They were like, we were tweeting with it. And the tag started trending. And I was super excited. I told somebody, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, be an ally. It's trending at the RSA conference. And he goes, you know, there's another way to read that. So if you take the capital letters out of it, it reads entirely differently. I'm not going to say it. But if you look at it, and there's a couple of different ways. Being ally is one of them, and there's another one. And it was actually kind of humorous in the moment, but that could have been the reason it was trending. I don't know. Does anybody see it? Okay. The problem with allyship is it's a word that actually is a new word. And so when you have a new word or you create a new phrase like that, it has to have the meaning poured into it. Because it doesn't come with it already, right? So lots of different groups are pouring different meaning. When I use allyship in the context of burnout prevention, here's how I invite you to think about it. There was a well-known Jewish teacher, walked the earth in the 1st century, and he was asked a question, what is the most important law for us to keep? And I'll paraphrase his answer like this. The most important law is to love the Creator with all you've got. And the second most important law is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So here's the thing, when we put meaning into what allyship is, the attributes of the Creator are mercy, graciousness, being slow to anger, patience, kindness, truthfulness, forgiving, compassion, and justice. Right? That, my friends, is allyship. And the trick is that when you are able to keep the space for yourself and fill your cup with all those attributes that are a part of you, you are made to have all those parts in you as well. And when you can fill those up, you can pour them into the cup of others. Right? So that is about holding space. That is about belief. That is about resilience. Take the time to recognize that your ability to be an ally to somebody else comes from being an ally to you. And filling your own cup and making sure that you're not trying to fill somebody else's cup out of your empty cup. It doesn't work. I'm proof. Live that one. Now, sometimes being an ally kind of comes back in a way that's kind of tough. And when that happens, my favorite question to always ask is, what's up with that? Right? Why doesn't that work? Don't make any assumptions. Don't go to the belief that it was the wrong thing for you to do. Don't go to the belief that you don't know how to do it right. Be resilient. Do it again. we need to continue to reach out and be allies to one another. All of it is a path of self-discipline and self-discovery, and you can see that I'm kind of a senior in this journey of my own, and I had a major breakthrough in this myself just this last year, because one of the things that I realized that throughout my career, as I'm driven to be doing the thing that I need to be doing to raise my family, who are now raised, my kids are in their 40s, I always had one question, and it made me very successful at what I did. And my question every day was, my primary question, what do I need to fix today? I was the one who was going to be the fixer. I was the one who was going to find the path. I was the one who was going to find the way, right? What do I need to fix today? The problem with that primary question is that it assumes that everything and everyone is broken. So my new primary question as of last year became, how can I see more and appreciate more the beauty in every person around me? And that is my primary question for allyship. It's also the thing that's made me more effective than I've ever been before, because it's about how we do this together. It's about how we pull everybody together and how we realize that we are, like everybody said during 2020, we are in this together, right? So we're going to stand together and make sure that we care for ourselves, that we care for one another. And that is probably our primary antidote to burnout. So there's online resources. If you want to use them, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to answer any questions that anybody has. I'm going to be doing this work at VMware, so we'll see how well I walk the talk once I'm back in the fire again. But you can do this. Burnout is affecting 2/3 of the people in this room right now. So kind of do that self-assessment, kind of take a look at it from this standpoint, because you can make that difference by taking the right steps and actions. Even if it's just putting your phone in a little phone sleeping bag one day a week, like I wrote about on LinkedIn, you can do it. We can do it together. So if we have time for questions, I'd be happy to take any questions for the next 10 minutes.
So I too love Palisade peaches, and that's a great little trick. But what if it isn't peach season? Do you have any other little tricks?
Apples work. Well, the kinds of things, no, that's really the kinds of things that they show work is those things that engage our appreciation of the senses. It could be, everybody's going to have something different. I have a couple of things that are my go-to, right? I call it smell, swell, smells. I'm a huge believer in beeswax candles. I started that back in Washington State when I lived up there because it's so dark so much of the year and kind of cold and dreary, but they smell like honey, right? So I'm very olfactory oriented. So things that smell amazing to me, that's what you think about that, if that's what you like. If it's something that you love to feel, like touch, cashmere is amazing. But something that you just, when you pick it up and you're holding it or wrapping yourself in it, that makes you just feel amazing. That's another way. getting outside and walking barefoot on grass, walking out and going to the botanic gardens and seeing beautiful things. It all has to do with re-engaging that part of us that is our sensory, heart-centered piece to get us out of our head. Yeah. So whatever works, everybody's going to be a little bit different. And I've been known to pull out like all 7 of my tricks all at once when I needed them. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Oh.
So as an ally, what's maybe some effective techniques to help others perhaps recognize burnout in other people?
Right, that's a super good question. And here's why I love that question so much, is because burned out people are the last people to recognize that they're burned out. Or they may be unable to admit it. I was so fortunate to have a friend who knew me well enough. We worked together all the time. We traveled a lot together. And he could tell by my face, something in my face. He's like, oh my gosh, there you go again. And he would say, rescue chocolate. But it was recognizing people who are detached. They're detaching from what they're doing. There's something that the Desert Fathers actually called, I talk about this in the paper that's online, but there's something our Desert Fathers called acedia. It was one of the 7 deadly sins, and it is the second deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. A lot of times they call it sloth, and we think of it as laziness. But what happens with people who are on that process of burning out, it may look like depression, but if it's not clinical depression, it can be this thing where the best way I can describe it is as if the song of your soul goes silent. You don't have the enjoyment. You don't wake up and go, man, it is amazing to be alive today. It's like, oh, how am I going to get through today? There's a big difference. When you know someone well enough to see signals that the things that they love, that the enthusiasm is dimming, then that's the time to kind of like say, hey, like, how are you doing? And I just had this happen with a friend of mine recently where I know her really well. I sent her a text message. I knew somebody called me and they said, she's in another state right now, you need to call her. And I texted her, got no answer. Don't stop on the first try. I finally pestered her and called her, and she's like, I am so glad you called. I finally saw it was you, and I picked up the phone. So watch for those kinds of signs. Like you're just going to see someone whose light is dimming. That's another way to describe it. And there's something about, I use Palo Santo a lot. Anybody know what Palo Santo is? These fragrant wood sticks. And you can use them for smudge. I love this metaphor because in a stick of Palo Santo, if I burn it and it blackens on the outside and it looks all burned up and I crack it open, there's a spark in the middle. And all it takes is a breath, right, to start to bring that back. And that's the way we are with each other. Somebody can look just burnt on the outside, but everybody's got the flame, and it just needs your breath sometimes to get re-going. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a very pedantic question. Can you mention that website address again where the downloadable paper is available?
Yeah. www.bnli.today. Yeah. Yeah, and it'll ask you for your email, but the only person who sees that is me. That's how we get the paper to you, so you won't get spammed. Yep, the question here.
If you were, like, in your experience, in, excuse me, would you bring this up to just your team, or would you include your stakeholders or bosses, or would that ever offend them when you, like, bring up cynicism?
Great question.
Sorry, I have a scratchy voice. Just because my team, there's a lot of cynicism, and I know my bosses would be very offended. 'Cause
They would be offended by what would they be offended by?
Just, I think they would be hurt that people are like, what, questioning their thought process. I also have an odd job, so that's kind of on the side, but I was just thinking, like, in general, would you just bring this up with your team, or would you include upper management?
Yeah, take a look, if you get the paper, take a look at the section on cynicism. Okay, and here's what it says. That cynicism is an illogical thought pattern. First of all, we have to recognize that fundamentally it's illogical. It is illogical that nobody gives a rip about you, and so as making stupid decisions as the leadership of the organization. I mean, it happens, but not consistently, right? So I think it's we had someone who joined our clubhouse. We did a clubhouse thing on Sunday nights, and someone joined it and said, I downloaded your paper. My team was having a serious problem with this. And we went through this to kind of look at first of all, what is it that's making us feel like nobody cares? And have that conversation, bring it out in the open. I think just calling it out is actually part of, the process. I wouldn't take it to the bosses necessarily because they haven't resolved it internally. And I can tell you from working with hundreds and hundreds of people on cynicism over the years, because we are a cynical lot, and to have that sense that there's a belief. Cynicism is a belief. And so getting people to see the other side of it, you might do it with a bowl of Palisade peaches on the table, but to get them to kind of like start to look at how else can I look at this, and some perspective taking would be helpful. Yeah. And I'll bet that if you don't need to tell the bosses that people are cynical, they know. Yeah. So the opportunity then for you, I don't know anything about your situation, but an opportunity for you as a career move is to say, I've really noticed that we have some of this going on in our group, and this is what we're doing about it. Yeah, that's a great way to have the conversation instead of bringing up a problem. Yeah.
So last year I was kind of inundated with a lot of things, and I think a lot of people were just hit with a bunch of things in 1 year, the pandemic plus whatever else. And I felt like I just couldn't. I work from home and have for 12 years, I think. I'm lost track of time. The days just all seemed like they ran together. But it was one of those things where things were just getting to a very agitated level. So I set up a trip with my daughter, who's now a junior in college, right after the 4th of July to drive into the desert of Las Vegas, where my sister and nieces are. And I've never had a better time at 113 degrees because there wasn't a lot of people around. We sat by the pool. I visited with family. And it was one of those things that after I came back, my mental health was different. And I didn't realize that I was having a minor mental health crisis because we don't talk about it. But I also am a telecommuter. So how do you get to a place with telecommuters that we're all going, we're kind of those hidden silent people before the pandemic. How do you get to the point with your group where you're saying, we need to talk about burnout, we need to talk about cynicism, because it's coming up on our company survey, the last couple of surveys. Are you burned out? Do you feel this? That type of thing. So what do you recommend for groups? My whole team's virtual. So
personally, you did something that really helped you have a reset and recognize how serious the situation was becoming. And now you're recognizing that this is something, is part of the virtual team, and want to know what you can do as a team exercise.
Well, just something to bring it up more in team meetings and
Yeah.
such, and in the United States, we're having a lot of people retire late 50s, early 60s now because they're just done. They're like
Yeah.
the done factor. Stick
Yeah.
a fork in them, they're done.
Right.
So
Right. So this is something I would love to hear. Everybody's been through this, right? This past year where we were all kind of like working from home and telecommuting. The thing I missed the most was having the conversation with somebody that says, hey, how are you doing? Like having a team meeting where it's like, we're not going to talk about the agenda yet, because the very first thing we're going to do is a check-in with everybody. Now, probably what's going to happen is people are going to go, yeah, no. That's very vulnerable. But if that is a repeated thing over time, and a couple of people start to pick up on that, I've noticed that other people become more willing to do it, and they've incorporated that into their team meetings. That's just what I'm hearing from other people on Clubhouse too. It's not like you can all get together in a room. So you're going to have to do it virtually with cameras on, if possible, if people are willing to do that. And a lot of people struggle with that too. So having the cameras off makes it even harder. I would really, my husband is a cameras off guy. He's like, yeah, my camera doesn't work. I said, I fixed it. He goes, no, it's not working again. It's like, oh. So he just feels like that's an invasion of privacy. So if your team, do you think your team would be willing to put their cameras on? And what do you think how would that work with your group if you kind of had an opener of, how's it going? Checking in with, really want to check in with people. Have an opening question even, right? It's like, we're going to do something a little bit different. And find something that resonates with your group as an opening question, as opposed to leaving it too wide, but not a yes/no question. You don't want to leave it too wide open.
I think that it's too much about business. And I'm not the director or director. Sometimes it's too much. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about.
Right.
It's a group of project managers.
Right.
So, we're all pretty good. We've been doing it for a long time. It seems like a little more personal, not invasive, but just personal of how did you deal with this?
I think the thing to realize is that when we go virtual, we lose the connection of, I can see you, right? I can see you. I can see your body language. I can see that, you really got dressed up super nice today. Like, I can tell you got the energy to do that. That's unconscious information that tells me something about you, right? And then there's the day that I've got my baseball cap pulled down and I've got my hair up under my baseball cap and I've got my sweatshirt on over my pajama bottoms, but nobody can tell. It's harder to see on Zoom. We need that connection with people, and when we don't have it face to face, we have to ask. We have to, I think, be intentional about asking. Yeah. I think we're done. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, you guys.